Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent takes his turn in the White House briefing room. And do we have a deal in Iran? Former Undersecretary of Defense and VA Secretary Robert Wilkie joins us. Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've made it through the work week. It is Friday. I'm excited. The weather's nice, finally. I'm excited. I feel like it's almost summery. Robert Wilkie, former VA Secretary. And by the way, I want to ask Robert Wilkie, as the Veterans Affairs Secretary, whether or not he thinks Graham Plattner, the guy in Maine, should be using PTSD. But I also want to get into him with the ceasefire that's happening, potentially, President signing off, in Iran. What does it mean? Should we trust him? Should we not? A lot to get to with him. It was pretty unbelievable. And as I've said before, it's just, we'll see. The proof is in the pudding, but I got briefed earlier this week. I think that there is a decent chance that the U.S. has jammed Iran into the situation. I don't trust them. I think we got to verify, but I think everybody in the White House is eyes wide open in this whole situation. So that's where my head is at. Yesterday, I thought it was pretty cool because Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, it was his turn to do the White House briefing. Now, one quick thing that I want to make sure everybody gets, because it's gotten lost. When I was press secretary and I went into the Pentagon to do reserve duty, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was my deputy. She stepped in, did the briefing. It was great. When Sarah was traveling, Raj Shah, her deputy, did it. When Jen Psaki didn't do the briefing, the deputy, right? The reason I'm saying this is normally the deputy press secretary steps up and does the briefing for the day. That's how it's always gone. In Trump world, the vice president does the briefing, the secretary of state did the briefing, and now the secretary of the treasury does the briefing. Take a listen. This is Scott Bessent yesterday on his way out, like one of the last questions. It was one of my favorites. Take a listen.
Thank you, sir. Governor Gavin Newsom has floated this idea of a 100% state tax on Californians who receive money from President Trump's anti-weaponization fund. Your response to the governor's call for 100%?
There's no cure for stupid. Okay. Thank you all.
That's a drop the mic moment. There is no cure for stupid. I love it. Scott Bessent, obviously very smart, very knowledgeable, but also has that just a very interesting sense of humor. I like it. He's a little dry, but he's funny. And when you're that smart and that successful, you can do that. So anyway, Robert Wilkie is here. He is the former VA Secretary with America First Policy Institute and the former Undersecretary of Defense and a colonel in the Air Force and long family history. Before I bring him in, though, I got to remind you guys, this is the last couple days. If you want, I don't want to keep doing this. I do, but I want to make sure if I do this deal with the books that you get them in time. So for Father's Day, and frankly, if it's not for your father, if it's for a friend or for a birthday or for a Mother's Day that you forgot, then that's cool too. But I'm doing inscriptions, signed inscriptions to anybody who wants, and of either the briefing, my first book, or Trump 2.0. You go to SeanSpicer.com, hit the books tab, and then you send the inscription after you pay for it to contact@SeanSpicer.com. So happy Father's Day, Dad. Love you. And then I'll sign it for you. But anyway, that's just for a couple days because I want to make sure we actually get them out the door. So go to SeanSpicer.com and you will get to see that. So without further ado, by the way, next week, another great week. We've got a lot of guests coming through, Dave Rubin and some other great people. So you're not going to want to miss that. Hit that subscribe and notification button. And I have a brand new newsletter out at SeanSpicer.com. So many things to tell you about. Anyway, let me just get this going. Without further ado, I want to bring in former Secretary Robert Wilkie. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you.
It's always good to see you, Sean.
All right. This ceasefire.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I'm laughing because the ceasefire that's been in place since April 8th, but the last, couple times this week, there's been a lot of firing. So it's not been the best ceasefire. I know it's been described as fragile. Give me what you think the state of play is.
Well, the state of play is, I'll be honest with you, I didn't agree with the ceasefire. I think there's a principle in the military art: when the enemy is running, you don't let him regroup, you don't let him reform. And I think we had incredible leverage prior to the implementation of the ceasefire. I think we should finish this job because in the time that we stopped, and the time that we are experiencing now, this point in time, they've been reconstituting their forces such as they are. The Chinese have been slipping the ballistic missile parts through borders. They're not going to stop unless they are stopped. And I think after all of the treasure that has been expended, if we don't finish it, we'll be right back here in a year.
Would you have just kept pounding them? I mean, I felt like we kept saying the field marshal of Pakistan has asked us, and I get that, but I always got the sense that unless you keep pounding them, they're not going to respect.
Yeah, that's right. And let me go back to my own family's history. I mean, my father at one time was the operations chief for the 82nd Airborne Division. He was the G3 for operations for 18th Airborne Corps in the first years of the Iranian regime. And one of the prime taskings for the All-American Division was, in the event of a kinetic fight in that Gulf, they would take those islands. The Marines would take the offshore platforms, and you cut off the leverage points that the Iranians had to interrupt global commerce. I don't know why that wasn't done, but we have to force open those straits. It's been a foundational principle of American policy since the administration of Thomas Jefferson that no one can be permitted to interfere with global commerce. And that's an international strait, and the Iranians have claimed sovereignty over it.
So on Sunday night, right before Memorial Day, I had a conversation with a very, 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 very senior U.S. official. Those are the terms of the discussion. And they felt very positive about where things were headed. But they shared a nuance that I thought was interesting, which is the following, that the way that Iran is set up, that the simplest change to any agreement takes a long time because it literally has to go, we send it to so-and-so, they send it to so-and-so, they send it to 5 people, and then a pack of mules carries it to another set of people who then bring it to the supreme leader. And then he makes his change, they send it back to the pack of mules bring it back. I mean, like, right? So their point was, this is not going to happen quickly, okay?
No.
So I say that because why do the Iranians, if they're interested in peace, these drone attacks at a time when we're trying to negotiate this don't seem to be in keeping with what would be appear a stated desire to wrap this up?
Well, first of all, these are dead enders. They know the lessons of Ukraine when Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for Western security guarantees. They know what happened to Gaddafi when he gave up his nuclear program. He ended up with a bullet in the temple in a ditch. They are determined to drag this out as long as they can. They believe that the closer they get to a midterm election, the more likely it is that they can survive intact. Look, there's never been an agreement that they've ever kept. I mean, these people are signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They certainly haven't been following that. And I don't expect them to follow any agreement. It's not worth the paper. And I'll also note that the foreign minister has written a book about how to negotiate in the bazaar. And that is to extend negotiations as long as possible. And then when you're on the cusp of a deal, introduce a new idea at the last minute, which extends the timeline. These folks have thousands of years of practice at this. They're trying it. And in the meantime, there's nothing on the table that deals with their proxies. There's nothing on the table that deals with development of ballistic missiles. And there's nothing on the table that says once and for all, you better not have the ability to enrich uranium. And they've even said in the last day that that's non-negotiable.
I love, when people ask me about Donald Trump, I'll go, he wrote 15 books. Like, if you really want to know him, he put it all down on paper. And right. I think the same thing with the Chinese. They've written down their plan. It's not a secret. And when you just said this, to me, it's like, why are we not going, guys? They're literally saying and acting exactly how the foreign minister laid out they would in a negotiation? Like, and why are we pretending like it's real?
I don't know. I don't know. And you and I have talked about this, and I put it in all my speeches. When someone tells you over and over again he wants to kill you, believe it. This foreign minister has said that Israel is a one bomb solution. If they could, they would deliver that. In fact, Sean, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed and had a podcast with the Swedish defense minister. And he said that in the week after the attacks in February began, the Swedish intelligence service uncovered in Sweden 11 Iranian backed plots to kill Swedes, to kill Swedish Jews. These people have waged war across the planet. And you and I last talked about the advantages of removing Maduro. One of the advantages is that he was giving diplomatic cover through distributing passports and creating false diplomats to thousands of Iranian killers and Hezbollah killers to disperse throughout the globe. This is a long-term project for the Iranians. And last thing I'll say, and we can talk about this a little more, I've been arguing that for those in the administration who believe that China is the be-all and end-all, you take care of the mullahs and the IRGC, and you have just eliminated China's foothold in the Middle East, a foothold that they would have used or would use to distract the United States, to disperse our forces in the event that they cause mischief in Asia and the Pacific. And that is also the way station for Chinese weapons that flow secretly through Iran into Russia for the war against Ukraine. The day that we began those attacks in February, there were 5 Chinese ships offloading ballistic missile parts, or dual-use technology, as they now say, as quickly as they could. So that's the other component here. And I think President Trump has an opportunity not only to relieve the world of this evil, but also to change the global map in ways that years ago we would have never contemplated.
Do you think that President Trump's meeting with President Xi in any way will have an effect on the Chinese support for the Iranians that you just mentioned?
Well, they continue to supply them. During this ceasefire, they've been offloading parts.
Have they been doing it, or do they hide behind, well, that's a Chinese company, that's not us, even though you and I both know that's the same thing?
They create many legal fictions. But look, they don't even send a student over here unless the People's Liberation Army Intelligence Service clears that individual and tells that individual what you will collect. I mean, this is a totalitarian state right down to the grass. So yes, that is what's there. I think what President Trump came to the table with was an unspoken message. By the way, Xi, your most advanced defense systems and those of the Russian Federation were obliterated in the first 30 minutes of the attack. We are the only nation capable of launching operations like this across the globe. And I think the Mandarins started scurrying in after that first day when they realized that they too are vulnerable. And their systems really don't work very well against the systems of the West. And I certainly include the Israelis in that.
You know, when we executed some bombing activity earlier this week, the Iranians responded to these to the U.S. drone strikes by carrying out an overnight strike towards a U.S. base in Kuwait. Yeah. Was that was that just to say we can get you, or we don't want to after a Navy ship, or why go after a base? Is there a strategic difference in how they come after us or respond to us?
Well, yeah, I think it's part of the same thing. One, the ship moves, as you know, as a naval captain. The ship can move. Base is right there. But it's all part of a concerted propaganda campaign that, look, we're still here. The Secretary of Defense says that we've been obliterated, and yet we're firing on American bases. We're also firing on American bases in the territory of U.S.-friendly states to remind them that we can reach out and touch them. So it's a very complex political and terroristic message that they send every time they do that kind of thing.
When we head into the weekend, I always tell people keep an eye on the weekend because I think that's when President Trump. And the last few weekends, last weekend, as I mentioned, by Sunday I was getting phone calls saying, "Hey, I want to get you in the loop on what's going on." Not how I thought that weekend was going to go. Based on the read that I gave you earlier, which is that they are trying to set the U.S. at least the U.S. government is trying to say this is going to take a while. Should we expect anything this weekend, or is it just, as I said, it's just going to take a while and these exchanges are going to be painfully slow?
Well, look, in my heart of hearts, I hope what this is just a lull before another hammer comes down. The other time that we went through this, the Iranians fell for it. They were led down a primrose path, and then they were savaged with a series of concerted attacks on their leadership, on their military infrastructure, and what have you. I think it's going to come down to that because, again, I can't conceive of any agreement that can be reached with these folks, what that they would keep, and one that would inure to the benefit of American security. And look, the other sides they're watching. The Russians are watching. The Chinese are watching, and they are looking to see if the Iranians can create the narrative that America's military is unparalleled, but if you just wait them out, the political classes will pull back, particularly in an election year. I don't think they've read President Trump right, but I think that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, I want to get to China in a second. But I mean, one of the big issues for us domestically is getting the Strait of Hormuz back open in a way that commercial oil-specific traffic can flow. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how close to reality do you think that is based on where the negotiations stand?
Well, look, we've done this before. We did this under Ronald Reagan.
In the 80s.
Yeah.
But we didn't have drones and fast boats the way that we do now.
No, but we were certainly ready for the fast boats. We had plans in place, and I've done the war games as Undersecretary of Defense, and I've done it as an Air Force officer. We also had a great partner in the Royal Navy, which is almost non-existent now. That those plans included a hefty participation by the British, and as you know, they've got 10 destroyers now, and 9 of them can't sail. I mean, that's the other part of this equation. But look, we have the plans to do it. I think it does require that we stick to what we had originally thought, that the All-American Division, the Marines, participate in creating that cordon that opens up the straits, and you continue to pound the southern Iranian littoral. And I, for some reason, I don't know why that was followed, but here we are.
During the cabinet meeting, Secretary Rubio reaffirmed the diplomatic aspects of all this, but also what the ultimate goal was for the administration. Take a listen to what Secretary Rubio had to say.
Mr. President, your preference has told us repeatedly, as always, to negotiate these things and to figure out if you can have agreements. Diplomacy is always the first option, and we continue to work on that through your envoys, Mr. Woodcoff and Kushner and others, the Vice President, who've been very involved. And if there's an agreement to be made, we want that to be made. I think there's been some progress and some interest, and we'll see over the next few hours and days whether progress could be made.
So you heard him right there saying that the goal is ultimately never allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon, right? And yet earlier in this conversation, you and I both are on the same page that we can't trust them. The
Right.
phrase that kept coming up during my conversation with this senior government official was the phrase was "no dust, no dollar." Right, the idea of the uranium dust. If we don't see it, if we don't get it, if we don't control it, they get nothing. How realistic is this? Because to your point, not only have they chanted death to America over and over, they've made it very clear, even during the Obama JCPOA negotiations, that they were like, maybe we'll put it off for a couple days, but
Right.
we're going to get one.
Right. And even the IAEA said that they were cheating during the Obama Biden years. So, that notion that they're going to abide by this when they understand that this is a question of regime survival based on the examples that I gave earlier, which they have certainly taken note of. And look, let me just say the blockade is working, Sean. They're down to about a week and a half worth of reserves in their treasury. And once that dries up, then you begin to see, I think, the separation of the true believers from the fellow travelers, because you will see in the security forces the fellow travelers abandoning their posts and going to protect their families. And you're left with that rump of hardcore fanatics. But, you're a naval officer. Blockades don't work overnight. They take time. This one is working. We are the ones with the hands on the levers. And I think we should use those to maximum effect.
So it's funny because this same person that I talked to Sunday night described it as Operation Economic Fury and said that we are really having a massive impact on their economy.
Well, that's true.
I know, but it's funny that you're really the first person that I've talked to that's really described the state of Iran's economy in the way that you did.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what a blockade does. We learned these lessons in the Civil War. We learned these lessons watching the British blockade Imperial Germany and then Nazi Germany. So we have many years of experience with this. And remember, 80% of the food and medicine that the Iranians get come through the Persian Gulf, and they're deprived of that. Right before these attacks started, the rial was about 1.2 million to the dollar. And that's when the people took to the streets. I think it's probably worse off. I know it's worse off now. And we just have to continue. The blockade's not been on that long, but it is working, and they're running out of money, and they can't sell that oil. In fact, they're to the point where they can't even put any more oil into the containers. I don't know what the technical term is for where they store the oil. So they're on death's door. It's just a question, I think, of pushing the door in.
We mentioned the negotiations and the time and are they actually meaningful negotiations? But there's also another question that I have, which is like, are we negotiating with the right people? Does the supreme leader, do we actually know we're dealing with him? Does he have the juice? Does the IRGC, how do we even know that we're really negotiating with the right people and that they have the authority to sign off?
That goes back to what you said at the beginning in terms of where do the ideas, where do the proposals go? I think what we have now entered into is a period where the mullah is the front man. He's the figurehead. He represents some sort of continuity that began with Khomeini back in 1979. I think the hardcore criminals, and they're all criminals, but the real hardcore are the IRGC. They're sort of the SS of the theocracy. They also have to know that if they get to the point where they are further weakened, then I think if the people take to the streets, they're going to be the first target.
Do you but does it worry you? I mean, not worry you like Robert Wilkie, but should it worry us that we haven't seen Khomeini, the supreme leader, and like there were reports he got hurt in one of these
Right.
attacks? And my point is, it's somewhat like, are we negotiating with Oz behind the curtain? Like that it's
Well, that's right. But I do think, yes, I think we haven't, and I don't know this to be true, but I'm guessing that the real puppet masters are the guys in uniform. We've killed off most of the clerical leadership. There are even fights that I know exist between the speaker of the Iranian parliament. By the way, this is a guy who is a cosmic thug. I mean, when the protests took place back in January, he liked to go out in the street with his bodyguards and a baseball bat, and he would break the heads of those protesting who had been captured. That's what we're dealing with there. But, he's also not copacetic with the foreign minister. So you're absolutely right. You don't know in the end who's calling the shots. I think it's the military, but I don't see any military representatives in these negotiations. And we don't know if the speaker or the foreign minister happen to be speaking for the people who still have the guns.
Do you think that I know President Trump's been asked about this a bunch of times. Does he worry about the midterms? Does he worry about the economy? And he always says, I'm doing this because I'm trying to keep America safe. That's the right answer, right? But do the Iranians think to themselves, yeah, we get it though. It's an election year in America.
Yeah.
These guys aren't completely devoid of understanding our pressure points.
Sure. They've been able to survive since 1979 playing this game, this cat and mouse game, not just with the United States, but with the West writ large. And, they've got thousands of years of practice in obfuscation, denial, lying, deceit. But they're also seasoned political operatives. You don't survive in that region of the world if you're not. I remember this crowd survived a war with Iraq where there were, I think, 1.1 million dead in 8 years, and they survived it. And it's Saddam Hussein who's not on the planet anymore. They're still here. So these people are practiced in the art of survival. And look, you hinted at something. The American people know the danger that Iran poses. They know they've killed thousands of Americans. They want Iran eliminated, and they also support Israel in their fight. And I think that's the miscalculation that the Iranians are making. I also think, and you and I have both worked for the president, I think, as certainly as we approach July 4th, I think a more forceful presentation to the American people as to why this is in our vital interest needs to be made.
Yeah.
Because look, the American people, heck, I mean, I was a child of the Vietnam conflict in the sense that I was living at Fort Bragg and Fort Sill watching my father go to Vietnam for multiple tours. American people didn't sour on that till President Nixon said, it's time to pull out. This has been mismanaged since day one. Let's leave. And the protests and the streets stopped the minute Nixon stopped the draft, because the Ivy Leaguers went back to their classrooms because there was no threat that they were going to be drafted anymore. And the protests in the street all of a sudden stopped. It's funny how that happens.
Crazy.
So we have a high threshold. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan. It wasn't until Joe Biden disgraced the United States that the American people finally said enough of Afghanistan. And, that was a debacle of the first order that I think we've suffered with. And I think that's the kind of thing that emboldened Putin. It emboldens the Ayatollahs or the IRGC to this day. So Yeah, it's the Middle East. You can't get much more complicated than the Middle East.
Well, let's make it more complicated. How do you, what is Israel's role right now?
Well, right now, Israel's role is the incredible intelligence operation that they have built up in Iran. I mean, the notion that the Jewish state could so thoroughly infiltrate every strata of the Iranian political class and the Iranian military to the point where it knew the movements of every leader, both civilian and uniform. It knew where underground storage facilities were. I think what they're doing is they've got their list of places that we should be hitting. Their intelligence on the ground is better than ours, but ours is, as you know, is centered on the skies and signals. They actually have the human resources in place, and they have been devastatingly effective in the last year. So I think that's what their role is. I'm sure they're feeding us things that we need to know.
So when it comes to this framework or deal, or I guess they're calling it a 60-day memorandum of understanding that will be the ceasefire, what do you view as the key milestones? Is it that nothing, like we can't see any firing, that that Iran has to show good faith? Like, what to you is going to be the benchmark that this thing is succeeding?
Okay, well then they need to open the straits, or disaster rains down from the heavens. A 60-day ceasefire without any preconditions just allows them to regroup a little more. It increases the threat. And look, they want to extend it as long as they can. They're trying to paint the picture that the United States has no staying power. And to them, as many times as they can drag this out, the better. But I don't know any of the details, obviously.
So let me give you one thing that has kind of come out of this MOU proposal. It says the U.S. officials said that the 60-day MOU will state that shipping through the Strait of Hormuz will be unrestricted. A U.S. official said that this means no tolls, no harassment, and that Iran will have to remove all mines from the strait within 30 days. The U.S. naval blockade, and this is the key thing, the U.S. naval blockade will also be lifted, but that will happen in proportion to the restoration of commercial shipping. So does that mean the Navy just starts to back off as they...
That's what it sounds like. And I don't know that the Iranians have the capability to go pick up the mines.
Right.
Most of the ships that they had that could do that are now at the bottom of the Gulf. I just don't know. I would have to look at that a little deeper.
Well, I don't know that we'll get more. Obviously, yeah, the president's going to get, but it also says that the U.S. will commit to discuss sanctions relief and the release of frozen Iranian assets as part of the negotiation.
See, that's Joe Biden again.
Well, that's the question.
Money.
Right. Is that giving them money or relief? Where's that line that Trump has to be careful of, that he doesn't do a JCPOA Biden thing?
Well, look, they're not giving you anything of substance, in the sense that they do not renounce the support for proxies. They do not renounce the support for international terror. They do not stop their development of ballistic missile capability. They don't renounce their desire to impose tolls for the foreseeable future in the Gulf, which is a violation of international law going back 800 years. So there are a lot of things that need to be put on the table. And again, anything this crowd agrees to, it's only designed to do one thing, and that is preserve the regime for future mischief.
I asked you about Israel, but the president seemed kind of pissed off at Oman. Why does Oman matter?
Well, Oman matters, and that is that it has incredible wealth. And the notion that all of a sudden it's going to be tied to the Iranians when it comes to the idea of imposing restrictions, tolls on an international waterway, the president should be incredibly upset with that. So let's knock down the Iranian argument right now. They often say, well, look at the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal exists entirely within the nation of Egypt. It is an Egyptian waterway that they give you permission to enter their territory. The Straits of Hormuz are an international waterway. They are recognized by the law of the sea, the law of admiralty, international customary international law that goes back centuries. America first went to a global war by enforcing the principle of freedom of the global commons when we fought Islamic terrorists for the first time under Thomas Jefferson. They were doing the same thing in the Mediterranean. They were closing off commerce to American ships. They were taking our ships, imprisoning our sailors, forcing them to convert or kill them. And Jefferson said, enough of that, I'm going to burn Algiers. And he sent the United States Navy and the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps erupted on the world stage. They blazed 1,000-mile path of destruction across North Africa. And the Ottomans, or the Bey of Algiers, who was a tool of the Sultan, put his hands up. Not enough.
Can I ask you a question? There's been a lot of chatter about the state of our munitions, our
Yes.
rockets, our missiles. How worried should we be that based on Ukraine, Israel, even Venezuela, I guess, I don't know, maybe not,
No.
but like,
No, man.
how concerned should we be?
It is a big issue, and it's certainly a massive issue for the future. Look, I'll give you a British example. Sean, my father was a liaison officer to the Royal Regiment of Artillery. Today, if the British Army engaged in a Ukraine-style fight, they have enough artillery ammunition for a day and a half. And that's the 5th largest economy on the planet. We should be, and we have to focus on what I call the mundane aspects of national defense: artillery shells, precision-guided munitions. President Trump proved in the first term, and I am the proof of that, as the head of VA, that he can force industry to do what the government, what the people need. In that case, it was to develop a vaccine that the experts told him would take 5 to 10 years at the earliest. And he used the levers that the president has, the levers of power, to force industry to come up with a vaccine. I think we have to do the same thing. And it's not, I said, the mundane aspects. We need more ships.
Right.
We have the smallest Navy since 1938. I don't care what people say about quality, because there will be a time when the quantity that the Chinese have will overwhelm quality. They don't have it yet. They don't have the expertise, but they have 110 shipyards. We have 10 that build naval ships. And here's the one frightening statistic that I say for all my friends in the Navy. The maintenance on our nuclear attack fleet, submarine fleet alone, would take the full capacity of our naval shipyards for the next 30 years, just the maintenance on the submarines.
Well,
So that's the kind of thing we need to focus on.
Well, that leads me to, we talked about China a minute ago. If China knows this and has watched what we've done into Iran, there was a report that they've sped up their thought about how soon to take over Taiwan the next few years. I haven't seen a plan that shows us winning that engagement.
No, we have had war game after war game, fleet on fleet action. However, a couple of things. We have an exponential advantage under the water. We have better eyes in the sky. Amphibious operations are still the most difficult in warfare. Only 3 nations have ever accomplished them. One is Great Britain and Canada, put those as one and two. But more importantly, the United States. The Chinese are untested. They have no experience. So that's in our favor, but the time for us to re-equip and rearm is getting much shorter. And I also say that for our Air Force.
Yeah.
And look, all the storm, thunder and lightning about things like DEI, what have you, physical fitness standards, important. I've written about it. But as a naval officer, you tell the military to get rid of that and produce standards, they'll do it in a week. What we need to focus on is to retool and rebuild. And we need to promote the engines of innovation for the armed services and for our military. And those are those small and medium-sized defense companies that come up with the ideas. We've lost, in the last 13, 14 years, we've lost over 10,000 small and medium-sized defense companies.
I got two more things I want to touch on you with real quick.
Yep.
First is, we talk about going on potentially on the defense in the South China Sea with respect to Taiwan. Yep. There's a lot of hubbub about going on the offense in Cuba. The Nimitz is just off the coast. That makes sense for the Navy.
Look, I think the Cuban regime is on the brink of falling on its own weight.
Right.
I hate to be. I don't want to sound flippant because I criticize people for sounding flippant and cartoonish when they talk about armed force. I mean, the Mississippi National Guard in a bean wagon could take Cuba if you wanted to. But I think we have to let it collapse. The people are ready. Donald Trump is putting the proper pressure on them by removing their allies in Venezuela.
Right.
They've removed the ability to run their 1930s power plants. The Soviet Union is gone. The last time the Russians showed support for the Cubans, they sailed a submarine and 2 submarine tenders into Havana Harbor about 5 years ago, and the batteries on the submarine broke, and they had to push the darn thing into Havana Harbor. So that's gone as well. And the people are restless. I'd say just let's wait a little while and let the people take them down.
Last thing I want to ask you is about the Senate candidate in Maine, Graham Plattner. He's got a Nazi tattoo, and he said that women should take some responsibility for their own sexual assault. When asked about this, he blames it on his PTSD. You're the Secretary of the VA, as well as being obviously the Undersecretary of Defense and a colonel in the United States Air Force. Have you heard anybody ever use PTSD as a rationale for getting a Nazi tattoo or saying that women deserve their own sexual assault?
And this needs to be put around the necks of the Democratic leadership. This guy is also an anti-Semite. He is now using a condition that has been brought on by combat and afflicting brave men and women as an excuse for abhorrent behavior. I mean, you can go all the way back to Freud, and Freud even said those kinds of brain injuries are not responsible for these kinds of political statements that people like this make. And I hope Susan Collins retires this guy for good. It's insulting, the things that he said. And the fact that the Democrats say nothing. They always demand that Republicans disown someone who says something crazy. But they certainly circle the wagons when one of their own is engaged in behavior like this. And Charles Schumer is silent in 7 languages.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for all the work that you and America First Policy Institute do, and look forward to catching up soon.
It's always good to be with you. No finer patriot.
Thank you, sir. All right, guys. Thanks to Secretary Wilkie for a great show and for a great point about Graham Plattner. I'll see you back here on Monday. As a reminder, go to SeanSpicer.com to sign up, to stay in the loop, to read my latest column. But also, if you're interested in buying Trump 2.0 and getting a signed, personalized edition for the next few days, SeanSpicer.com, hit the book tab. I'll see you back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.